A lot of background. This is an old family story told as a story. I heard it directly from my mom. In the 1930s, during the Depression in America, a lot of farms were lost to bankruptcy and bank forfeiture. Very often the bank would hire a local man who knew the local farmers and growers, and who would cooperate with the bank and sheriff in getting these farms and houses repossessed by the bank. Certain members of my family owned a small orange orchard in California's Central Valley that was holding its own, barely. Part of running an orange orchard at that time was a practice called smudging, where during a cold snap you could save the crop by burning oil in the smudge pots all over the orchard and keep the worst of the heat away. Smudging required the use of fuel oil to burn, and if you couldn't get the fuel oil to keep the crop alive and unfrozen, you'd lose more than half the value in a single night of freezing temperatures. So, growers would cooperate to buy into a fuel oil truck and share some of the operating costs. These trucks would go from farm to farm dispensing oil, and each grower would buy enough oil to put back into the trucks the amount they used for their orchards. Now it turns out that the local banksman in the area was a somewhat nearby neighbor of my family who also had his own small orchard. A certain relative of mine was a boy at that time, and he would earn extra money working for the banksman in his orchard. The banksman was a tyrant and a bully, who beat his wife and children, and who savagely beat my relative any time that the work done was not to his satisfaction. After yet another beating, the banksman informed my relative that he was going to make certain that the smudge truck did not have enough oil for my family's orchard, and that when the crop was ruined, he'd make sure that the bank got the orchard. Times were very different then. My relative did not complain to his parents or tell them about the problem he was having with the banksman. He only talked to his friends about the situation. So, a few families in the area were aware of the bankman's plot. One of the jobs that the man insisted on was my relative crawling down in the hatch of the fuel oil truck and dragging a small pump hose inside so that the man could manually pump out the very last dregs of the oil at the bottom. This was also considered unfair by the other growers because the next farmer in line always got a TTLE less oil than he should have and had to pay to make up the difference. No one said anything because everyone was afraid of the man's tyranny and temper. My relative decided that he'd had enough and he was going to quit work for the man and try to find other work for the growing season. So, he told the man that he'd be quitting, and perhaps unwisely, he also told the man that he knew that the man was the one making the oil count come up short each week. The man beat my relative unconscious as retribution. But, he chose a bad time to do it. Since my relative was unconscious laying out in the orchard, the man had to be the one to climb down into the bottom of the oil truck to set the pump hose in place. My relative wasn't actually unconscious. He was laying on the ground, faking. When he saw the man climb down inside, he climbed up to the hatch and apologized to the man for making him mad and offered to help. But when the last of the fuel oil was pumped up, my relative pulled up the pump and then locked and closed the hatch, trapping the man inside. After about half an hour, the fumes inside made the man pass out. My relative went home, and one of his friends arrived to pick up the truck. The friend drove the truck to the oil depot and filled it up. Then he drove it to the next farm in the rotation. The banksman was missing for several days before anyone took serious notice, and eventually his body was found in the tank. It was almost immediately ruled an accident, and no investigation was ever opened. His body was so saturated with oil and fumes that they had to bury him in a closed casket. The local funeral home in Strathmore refused to take him, so the funeral had to be held in Fresno instead, a long ways away. Almost no one attended. But, the sons of several local farmers and growers spent a lot of time providing free labor both to the widow and to my relative's parents all year that year. My relative's parents almost certainly knew what had happened to the man, but they didn't ever talk about it. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Reddit Diaries. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories from the depths of the internet. And remember, there's always something new to discover on Reddit. See you next time.